We had two absolutely horrific mass shootings that just happened recently. We have the one in Atlanta where a young man, I think he was 21 years old, he went to various massage parlors and killed 8 Asian American women. We've learned more over the course of the past few days. It appears like he has very backwards, primitive views on women and on sex. He had a radical Christian upbringing. So there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to unpack in terms of his religious ideology and his views on gender. But it ended in tragedy where he murdered so many Asian women, and then immediately after that, the day after that, I believe it was, we had a mass shooting that happened in Boulder, Colorado. Yesterday on Twitter, it was trending. I actually don't know the details on this one, so I shouldn't really talk about it yet, but he might be Syrian American or something, and he killed, I believe it was 10 people. I haven't seen any information yet on the motive in this mass shooting, although you would imagine that if you're shooting up a random grocery store, it's hardly political or religious. It seems more like, a traditional case of unfortunate psychopathy and, deep mental illness. Although, anybody who commits a mass shooting, I think there's an argument that you're dealing with some degree of mental illness. But anyway, you had these two massacres happen back to back. So now the conversation is renewed on gun control. And I think Biden came out the other day and said there are two House gun bills that passed that he wants the Senate to pick up. One of them involves an assault weapons ban. We had previously had an assault weapons ban in the U.S., I believe it was in the 90s, but we don't need more. There was a sunset provision on it, and so Biden wants to bring that back. So I went ahead and polled you guys and asked you what you think about gun reform. Now, I find this really interesting. Unfortunately, it's a Twitter poll, so it's not exactly scientific, and I actually wish I had one more option where I could have also put regulate them medium. That's not the best way to frame it, but you guys get the point. But I gave you these options. I said guns, ban them, regulate them strictly, regulate them lightly, or no regulation. And, you could see the results right there. Ban them, we got 11.8%. Regulate them strictly, got 56.9%. Regulate them lightly, got 21.9%. No regulation, got 9.4%. So, you can see the ones that are the most popular by far and away are regulate them strictly or regulate them lightly, and regulate them strictly sort of won running away with 56.9%. Now, it's a Twitter poll, so you can only get so deep into the weeds and the specifics, but I left that up to people's interpretation as to how they view what does strictly mean exactly, what does lightly mean exactly. So, yeah, if you ask me, over the course of my life, I think I've gone back and forth on the issue of guns a number of times, but I think I've landed in a place that's relatively moderate in the sense that, when you look at the number of guns in this country and the number of mass shootings, that's not a coincidence that we by far and away have the most guns and by far and away have the most mass shootings. I mean, it is what it is. You can be even if you're enthusiastic about guns and you like them and you're against regulation, you can admit that fact because it is a fact that the number of mass shootings is directly tied to the number of guns that we have. It just makes it so much easier for somebody who wants to do something like that to get their hands on that. So I think that's true. But yes, I do struggle to some extent with this idea of should you take guns away from law-abiding American who would never do anything like that because some people would do something like that. And sometimes I think yes, and sometimes I think no. And ultimately I think I've landed in the place where I am for the general regulations that the Democrats propose. So I'm for universal background checks. I'm for high-capacity magazine bans. I've gone back and forth on the assault weapons ban. But I do think at the end of the day, even if you regulate guns strictly, you're still going to have more mass shootings in the United States than any other countries, because none of the proposals are gun buybacks and for retroactively, getting some of the guns out of the country. I mean, in 2020 alone, 40 million new guns were legally purchased. And I think the year before that, it was like 17 million or something. So you're not really going to make a dent, even with the regulations that are being proposed. I mean, actually, that's not fair. Will you make a dent? Sure. But we're still going to have thousands of gun deaths every single year in this country, even if you do the regulations that are being proposed. So, listen, there's a debate to be had here about the good of the community, the collective good of the people, and safety versus individual freedoms and, rights. And how do you balance those things? To what extent do you prioritize the safety of the community versus the right of the individual? And there are no easy answers to that. It is the case, and we have all the data in the world that shows this, whether you look at Japan or Australia, that when you effectively ban guns or just extremely reduce them, yeah, you're going to have no mass shootings. I mean, that's what happens. When there are no guns, you can't really do a mass shooting. But is that something in the U.S.? I don't even think we can do that, because we do have the Second Amendment. And even though it says for well-regulated militia, the court interpretation over the years has been that there's still, to some extent, an individual right to own a firearm, or at least certain kinds of firearms, right? So I don't even think you can do that in the U.S. Now, if you were to do that in the U.S., would that get rid of our mass shootings? Yes. But how are you even going to do that? Are you really going to go door to door and take everybody's guns? I don't even know how you would go about doing that. Even though it would work, that nobody would die, is that really the right answer? And is that even workable in this country? Well, if you answer no to that question, well, then what do we have left? We can do the regulations that are being proposed by the Democrats, and that would make a dent. But really, at the end of the day, we'd still have more gun deaths than any other developed country. So I guess this is a long way of me saying I don't have the answers. I kind of agree with what you guys said in the poll. I would say, yeah, regulate them strictly in the sense that I'm for all the regulations that the Democrats are proposing, but I think we should be honest about the effect that would really have. Maybe you'd cut the number of gun deaths at most in half, but that means you'd still have thousands of gun deaths. Because what is it? It's like 30,000 gun deaths a year, something like that in this country. Okay, so you reduce the number of gun deaths from 30,000 to 15,000. That's great. You save 15,000 lives. But of course, people are going to say at that time, well, now what about these 15,000? We got to do something to save these 15,000. What if the only way to save those 15,000 is to totally ban guns? What then? Well, then there's the tough conversation. Some people would say that's not a tough conversation. Save the 15,000 lives and ban the guns. Others would say, no, in order to do that, you would have to take guns away from law-abiding citizens who would never commit a crime. So it's just a difficult conversation all around. I do think you should do something. I do think you should increase regulation. But I think we should be honest about the extent of how much that would work and the effects of that. And then I think there's just, on some things, there's no good answers, and this is one of them. There's no good answers. At least I don't think there's any good answers, because I do value the individual ability to own a gun. Listen, to me, yes, being a gun owner, my dad was a gun owner. To me, being a gun owner is I know for sure I'd never do anything terrible like that. So I should be punished because there's people out there who do shit like that. It just seems wrong. But at the same time, it is true that if you took guns away from everybody, there would be no mass shootings. So what do? It's a catch-22. It's a paradox. It's something we'll never have a good answer for if you value those individual freedoms and also value the collective well-being and the good of the community. So, and listen, I think historically leftists have been torn on the issue of gun rights. There are plenty of total pro-gun rights leftists. And there are there are plenty of anti-gun rights leftists. So it's a difficult conversation, and I don't have the answers, and all I could do is try to dissect it to the best of my ability, and that's what I offered you here.